Ladies and gentlemen, dear honorable guests, it's my honor to chair this public lecture today organized by the Presidential Committee on Public Education in the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. But before starting the evening, let's remember Benőre Csapó, the former chair of this committee. Professor Csapó was a professor emeritus at the University of Szeged, where he had also assumed several important positions. Most recently, he was the leader of the research program for public education development and the chair of the Presidential Committee on Public Education of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. He was the winner of Hungarian's Prima Primissima Prize in 2015 and Doctor of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. In 2022, he became a Fellow of the International Academy of Education. So please stand up and remember him with a minute of respect. Thank you. And now I ask László Bozó, the chair of the Presidential Committee on Public Education, to welcome the participants and opening the meeting. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Welcome to everyone. The lecture hall is almost full, so we are very happy that you could come today, this afternoon, to listen to our guest lecturer, Professor Suzanne Hidi from University of Toronto, Canada. As Professor Gyöngyvér Molnár said, I am the newly nominated chair of the Presidential Committee on Public Education. And you might know that this lecture today is a part of the series of lectures initiated by Professor Benőre Csapó entitled Future of Education in a Knowledge-Rich Society. And you might remember that we could welcome very well-known scientists here before, Andreas Demetriou from Cyprus Academy of Sciences, then Teresina Núñez from Oxford, and very recently Eric Hanushek from Stanford University. And today our guest lecturer, as I told you, Professor Suzanne Hidi. You are warmly welcomed here. And let me ask Professor Gyöngyvér Molnár to introduce her to the full audience. Thank you.
So Suzanne Hidi earned her MA and PhD degree in educational psychology at the University of Toronto. For many years, she served as a professor at the Ontario Institute for Research in Education, and she is currently a faculty member in the Department of Educational Psychology and Human Development. She is also a founding fellow of the Senior College at the University of Toronto, where she was an associate professor of educational psychology. She taught courses on cognitive and developmental psychology, as well as conducted academic writing and research. Her work, which explores various aspects of learning and education, is internationally recognized. In 2022, she received the Sylvia Scribner Award from the American Educational Research Association. This award is given to outstanding researchers whose work has had a significant impact on thinking about learning and teaching and has influenced research direction. So it's really a high prestigious prize. Her publications, which have generated about 29,000 citations, address educational issues such as the importance of scientific writing and motivation. She places particular emphasis on interest and examines the role of rewards in commitment to task and performance. Her paper, 4 Phases of Interest Development, published in 2006, that was co-authored by Anne Renninger, received about 5,700 Google Scholar citations. It's really amazing. Recently, Suzanne Hidi has been researching the connections between neuroscience, educational science, and social psychology. She does this with specific focus on how the functioning of the brain explains reward processes, the difference between curiosity and interest, and the unique motivating power of interest. She is a co-editor and author of the book titled Cambridge Handbook of Motivation and Learning. This volume, which consists of 30 chapters, emphasizes the synergy of perspectives represented by educational, social, and development-type psychologists, learning researchers, and neuroscientists. One particularly important aspect of Hidi's work is her research on the role of interest in individuals' motivation and learning, independent of age, species, or social class. And which is really amazing, she can speak at least three languages: English, Italian, and Hungarian. Susan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for this wonderful introduction. First of all, I would like to ask you to put up your hands if you don't understand Hungarian. Is there anybody here who does not understand? No. You don't understand Hungarian. Okay, so you will excuse me because for a few minutes, just a few minutes, I will say a few things in Hungarian. And I assume most of you do understand English, right? Any hands who does not understand English is a big problem. So before I start to talk about my work and my research, I would like to actually say in Hungarian a few words about my friend Csapó Benő. 1990-ben volt egy könyv, amit úgy hívtak, hogy Learning and Instruction, and Hans Mendel and the Korte were the editors, és én abban meg voltam kérve, hogy írjak egy cikket, és meg is jelent az egyik cikkem, és amikor megnéztem a könyvet, akkor láttam, hogy ott volt egy magyar név, aki szintén abban a könyvben publikált, és ez volt Benő. Szóval így kezdődött, hogy összejöttek a soraink. Utána sokszor találkoztunk, Early, a European Educational Association-nek minden 2 évben van egy ilyen összejövetele, és ott lettünk mi tulajdonképpen jó barátságban. Beszéltünk Krisztiánnal erről, ő azt gondolta, hogy először 1990-ben Svédországban találkoztunk minnyájan. És ami engem úgy meglepett, az, hogy a Benő az kocsival jött mindig Budapestről, tele diákokkal. És akkor kérdeztem tőle, hogy hát ez nem fárasztó vezetni, és ennyi embert hozni, cipelni. És akkor ő elmagyarázta nekem, hogy anyagi körülmények között ez az egyetlen mód arra, hogy ezek a diákok tudjanak jönni a konferenciára. És ez jellemezte Benőt. Önzetlen, generous, wonderful man. Többször utána még találkoztunk, különböző konferenciákon. 2003-ban volt egy invited speech-em Pádovában, ahol szintén ott volt Krisztián, és akkor Benő hallgatta, amit mondtam, és mondta, hogy el kell, hogy gyere Szegedre. És mondta, hogy magyarul kell beszéljek, mert nem értenek angolul még a diákok. Hát ez egy nagy probléma volt, mert én a szakkifejezéseket nem tudom megmondani magyarul. És úgy emlékszem, hogy a Márta adott nekem egy listát valami 40 szóról, és nagy nehezen tudtam beszélni magyarul, de én most már tudom, hogy mindnyájan értetek angolul, úgyhogy I will do this in English. Ezek után sokszor találkoztunk különböző amerikai Education Research Association meetingeken, és itt Early-be, és mindig volt egy kapcsolat. Amikor 22-ben megkaptam ezt a jutalmat, akkor ő volt az egyik első ember, aki nekem gratulált. Tavaly szeptemberben a férjemmel együtt itt voltunk, és Vilma, a felesége, és ő följöttek Szegedről, csak azért, hogy együtt tudjunk ebédelni. Egy hosszú ebéd, liquid lunch, we call it, körülbelül 3 órát tartott, és én ezért külön nagyon hálás vagyok, mert ez az utolsó emlékem Vilmáról és Benőről. Ti mindnyájan tudjátok az ő akadémik sikereit, de én szeretnék róla megemlékezni, mint egy különleges ember. A wonderful man, who I wish rest in peace. Békében nyugodjon. Okay. My work. Megpróbálom ezt én állva mondani, de miután tegnap éjjel érkeztünk, nem biztos, hogy ezt mind tudom csinálni, és Márta felajánlotta, hogy átveszi ennek a kezelését. Szeretném ezt elmondani legelőször, mert ez nagyjából egy erős lényeg az én munkámnak. Mounting evidence demonstrates that the presence of interest is foundational, not only for motivation, but also for continued engagement and learning. Interest describes the way that people engage with activities and content. This can be like mathematics or playing music or all kinds of sport activities, philosophy. It refers to both the psychological state during engagement and the motivation to re-engage. I'm going to give you a very short outline of my talk so you have an idea where I'm going. I'm going to talk to you about my personal experience as a newcomer in Canada and my early research. And then I'm going to talk to you a bit so that you understand what it means, what are the characteristics of interest. I will introduce you to our famous four-phase model of interest, amit a Gyöngyvér leírt, hogy olyan nagyon sok, close to 6,000 Google Scholar citations, and it's kind of seminal to current interest research. And I will also mention a few empirical support of this model. I'm going to talk about Einstein's error, and now I want to trigger your curiosity, so I'm not going to tell you what that means. And I'm going to talk about interest and its relation to other motivational variables. Finally, I'm going to talk about reward, self, and neuroscientific research supporting the link to interest. And I will finish my talk with something that's not, it's just an implicitly related to interest, and that is the role of rewards and competition in education. And I find this a very important issue because of the bad name that rewards have acquired through the self-determination theory over the last 20 years or 30 years. And I just want to correct some what I consider misconceptions about this. Okay, my personal experience, how I got to be a motivational researcher. I was a cognitive psychologist and did a Piagetian thesis, and on my very first opportunity to do my own research, I turned to motivation and interest. And I tell you how this came about. When I arrived to Canada, I was very young and very poor. And I helped my husband, who is sitting over there in the blue shirt and black jacket and smiling at me. I had supported him while he finished his university. And then I enrolled into extension, which was at night and in the summer courses, because I worked and eventually ended up with having babies. And the way that the university was structured was that we had to take certain courses. So in each science, there was science and languages and social science and humanities. So we had to take courses in each one of these, the first 6. And I took economics, and philosophy. And the experience of these 2 courses left marks with me forever. Because every time I had to open the economics book, I was suffering. I didn't want to touch it, I didn't want to do an exam, and I almost flunked it first and only time in my life. Once the course was over, I closed the book, gave it away, and never ever touched anything again that was related to economics. In contrast, I loved philosophy. I loved reading about Hume and Kant and Descartes, and I could hardly wait to put my kid to bed so that I could open the books, and I, of course, aced it, my exam. And the only reason that I did not become a major in philosophy is that people told me that you will never get a job, you will never be able to make any money as a philosopher. So this was my personal experience, and it stayed with me that there is so much difference in whether you have interest in something or whether you don't have interest, how you relate to those subject matters and topics. So after I got my PhD and worked as a research associate, I worked on cognitive science and writing research, academic writing research. I have actually ended up putting in my own proposal as a research associate before I even became an associate professor to investigate text-based situational interest. So I wanted to know that if you give materials to children that have interesting and not interesting segments, how does this affect their ability to learn information, understand it, and also what were the characteristics of the text that elicited that kind of response. And at that point, it was the so-called level effect, very cognitive, very structural view in the literature that meant that you were expected, when you got a text, to evaluate the text in terms of how important text segments were. And you were supposed to actually remember that in a hierarchical fashion. So you were assumed to remember in the text the more important informations before anything else. So we looked at the text and we found that interest had a very strong effect, even if it was not important information in the text. So for example, one of the texts we gave to 4th to 6th graders was about the gorilla. And this text was scientific description of how the gorilla lived and what was important about the groups, etc. There was one sentence in this text which was, the leader of the group is called a silverback because of the silver hair that run down its back. Every single kid practically remembered this sentence, while they did not remember a lot of the scientific information that was included in the text. So this was the beginning of us realizing that there are certain text characteristics that, in spite of not being important, can actually bring kids to focus attention and to remember. We also looked at what were the text characteristics that have done this kind of, had this kind of effect. And I'm just mentioning some. I'm sure you are familiar with the collative variables of Berline, such as incongruity, not concrete, or concreteness. But in addition to this, we also found that there were a lot of other triggers of interest that were not included in collative variables. For example, intensity and self-relatedness. Other people were also doing, at this point, started to do research on interests like Schenk and Kinch. This is like 1979, 1980. And Schenk's work pointed to universally interesting items such as sex, death, power. And if you wrote about this, then people would really be interested in that text. We did an intervention study for 6th graders mostly, where we took texts such as dealt with inventors, Edison and Bell and so on. And we used what we learned about writing interesting text to write regular traditional text and the ones that we thought were interesting, triggering. And what the findings were, indeed we could increase recall and learning of the text segments that were given in the more better written text. But what was important to note, that the better recall focused on not the important scientific aspects of the light bulb, but on details of the people's lives and whatever could be self-related to the reader. And I want you to keep that, because I will talk about this again. What does self do to what you learn and what you can remember? Now, having done such good work in reading and interest, we figured out that we can do the same thing about writing. So all we have to do is give interesting topics and themes to children, and they will write better than if they had to write about something that was boring. So we had a lot of names, themes, and topics, and we ended up with 2 to represent the interesting and the not interesting ones. The interesting one was space travel. Kids, this is still early on, in the end of last century, space travel is coming in. Kids were very much interested in the topic. Living in the city, they all experienced, they thought it was terribly boring. So we made this hypothesis that they will write much better about space travel. What we did not consider is what is called, and this is something to do with your Hungarian serious knowledge. Kids did not have knowledge about space travel enough. It didn't matter how interested they were. They could not write about it because the supporting knowledge did not exist. Living in a city, they were bored to death, but they could write a lot about it because they were living in a city and they had lots of experience about to write. I'm not going to get into the details because we had a second study in which we gave them tutorials thinking we're going to change this pattern, but we couldn't. So basically, then recognized that knowledge is a very essential part of writing. You probably all know this, and you would think we should have known it, but we didn't. Anyway, so then we have changed our predictions about writing. At the time when I was doing this work on situational interest, somebody called my attention to a person called Anne Renninger. And Anne Renninger has been working, her thesis was on individual interest. So she didn't look so much about how to trigger in a situation interest, but that how people and young children had individual interest that was already either developed or developing. Anne Renninger is a professor at Swarthmore College in the United States, and she and I have worked together ever since that time when we came together. We wrote articles, books, edited things together. She's the younger sister I never had. So anyways, her early work with 3 to 5-year-old kids was astonishing, which was also her PhD thesis. What she had done was went into nursery schools and watched what children were playing. And once they picked up a toy, that was their interest because they returned to that toy repeatedly. Just as a side, I want to tell you that maybe this is not popular today, but there were gender differences already at age 3 because the girls tended to pick up different toys than the boys. But what she observed was that children repeatedly seeked out their preferred toys, and when she had little tasks to remember or memorize, there was a big difference on how they could recall activities and information related to the subject of their interest versus other stuff. So she wrote about this and pointed out that the beneficial impact of interest already at age 3 to 5 was very visible. They paid more attention, they recognized the objects, they recalled them, and they made little strategies to play with them. So we started talking together and attended conferences together, etc. And we decided that there has to be a link between what she was doing, individual interest, and what I was calling situational interest. And we, in early papers already, before working together, made this connection. And then we started to work together. There was a German psychologist called Andrea Kárpáti, who was also part of our early work together. And we made this developmental model. Before I introduce you to the developmental model, I just want to quickly tell you a little bit about the characteristics of interest. And this is based on many people's work, not just ours, came together from literature reviews and various findings. Interest is universal, although idiosyncratic. So you can have interest in cooking and you can have interest in philosophy, but the characteristics in itself has a biological root. Your brain and your physiological functioning is not the same when you are engaged with interest as opposed to when you are not. And this is very important, and I will, close to the end of my talk, I will return to this point. Interest can be supported, developed, and it's always content related. So you are interested in certain topics, you're not interested in everything. And you can have more than one interest. It has both a cognitive and an affective component, and that is important because a lot of other psychologists called it an emotion. And it has interest has a real cognitive basis with value and knowledge developing along interest. It's not simple an emotion. The environment is important, as I will point to it, in the beginning of interest. Then it becomes more self-focused. People are not necessarily consciously aware that they have an interest. You just glance at something and you start doing, and you can't put it down because you got really interest and you want to know the end, but you're not thinking that I'm now interested, although if I ask you, you might be able to answer me. It has a complex relation to psychological needs as self-determination theory's idea. And you can ask me about that later. I'm not going to get into this because it's not really relevant to my what I want to talk to you about, but it has a very different, we have a very different view about the so-called psychological needs and interests than SDT. I also want to correct some misconceptions. Interest, this is very important. Interest is not static. It's not a trait. It's not something that you're born with. Vocational interest researchers have measured it in 20, 30 years ago and matched your occupations to your interest. But we feel that interest is developmental, it's malleable, and it can be supported by the teachers, by the parents, by the environment, and change the pattern. It's not a belief, although it's related to, for example, self-efficacy, which is a belief. It's not the same as enjoyment. A lot of people measured interest to say, do you like this? Are interested? You like it? Well, liking is a component. There is an affective association, but it's not just simple. If you ask somebody, do you like this? And you assume that that's an interest, you don't distinguish with people who kind of like it and people who spend a lifetime working with this. So it's not enough as a measurement. It needs support, even if it develops. I use always an example that if you are a scientist and you write a research proposal and you love that research proposal and you submit it and you don't get any money, and then you resubmit it and you still don't get any money, and you third time resubmit it, and then you drop it. No matter how much interest you have, you drop it. You needed support that you didn't get, and you change your subject, you change your topic. Okay, so this is just a kind of summary. When you are interested, you search for relevant information. And that is a very important comment I'm making. Searching information, I will argue later to you, is extremely important because it's related to the activation of the reward circuitry in the brain. So you search for information, you want deeper understanding, you actually persevere. So even if you are frustrated, you try. So you don't throw out the research proposal after it has been once rejected. You try again, and you may try again. Or if you are corrected in some writing that you do, you don't throw it out, you try to continue if you have an interest in what you are doing. It leads you and helps you to have meaningful learning, and you are more attentive, etc. I already told you this. So the four-phase model is, in four-phase model, interest is conceptualized as basically both a psychological state. What I told you, you feel different, there's things different in your emotion, in your brain processing information, and it leads you to re-engage with the content over time. everybody has a potential to develop interest. And teachers are in the unique position to support that type of development. There are three components: feelings, value, and knowledge. And the relation of this component changes as interest develops. I will talk to you when I show you the model. This is the model, okay? So there are 4 phases: triggered situational interest, maintained situational interest, emerging individual interest, and well-developed individual interest. I'm not going to read you all this, but I'm going to point to some of the important aspects. At the beginning, early on, it's important to have some external triggers, which can be the environment, a parent, a teacher, or just something in the environment that you pick up, but there is an input coming from somewhere outside. And the more you develop your interest, the more the triggering can be self-generated. So there is a progression from extrinsic to intrinsic in this model. There is also a change in potential feeling, because the more you are developing your interest, the more positive feelings you are attaching to it, more knowledge and more value. And these are developing as you go through these 4 phases. And also, as you can see in the model, it has an increasing link to self-efficacy, goals, and self-regulation. So by the time you are in the 4th phase, you are kind of competent about the topic of your interest. You have developed knowledge and value. You self-regulate. Nobody has to tell you to open your philosophy book because you want to. And you feel efficacious because you have done so much work, you have spent time, and this is developmental. So these are the major issues, and we keep on emphasizing that all this progression can stop, can drop off, but with support and help, that may be the way to produce students who stick to content and develop meaningful work in their areas. Okay, we had a lot of misconceptions when we published the model, and we ended up having 3 items that we had to add, clarify to the original model. So if, let's say, you have a well-developed interest in a subject matter like philosophy, and you pick up a paper, you can have a situational interest triggered even the well-developed individual phase, which relates to your individual interest, and now it sort of expands. So situational interest is not just restricted at the first 2 phases. You can experience that kind of interest once it's related to your existing individual interest. Many interests, as I said to you, can co-occur, so the development is not restricted to one. And finally, the number of these 4 phases are not always identifiable in various groups. For example, this was actually a study that was published by a French-Canadian colleague of ours in Canada, that she was trying to find various, in her group of students, she was trying to find how many she could find in the emerging or well-developed interest regarding French. And she could find nothing in her group. Okay? Because they all took French because it was compulsory, and they have actually had no interest in this course. On the other hand, if you take somebody like a group of engineering students, you will not find in the group anybody who only has a triggered situational interest, because to get where they are, they already had to develop a certain level of interest in the subjects. So these were the 3 clarifications that we published in a recent paper we were asked to do. I don't let you read this because I want you to listen to me. That's why I'm doing this so slowly, but it is all there, so if you want, I can later send it to you. I want to illustrate to you Emma. Emma, how interest develops. Emma is a young adolescent who loves flowers. She attends her flower garden, and that's her major interest. She gets a camera. She has absolutely no interest in photography, but she gets a camera. So because of her interest in flowers, she decides that she wants to take a picture. So she takes the camera and she takes a picture. Well, she's very happy to see that she can actually take a picture of her flowers. And she keeps on taking pictures. And she goes back, so instead of having a triggered interest in the camera, she now has a maintained one because she keeps going and using it. But she still doesn't know anything about much how to take good pictures. Just clicks on them. One day she finds a little booklet in her camera box and starts to read it. And she finds out about the light, the speed, and all kinds of information, how to actually take good pictures. So this engagement is already an emerging individual interest when she keeps on reading it. She goes back, takes the flowers, gets the pictures, put them together. Eventually, she joins the school club of photography, and she starts thinking about becoming a photographer. So that is just the way that we see interest can develop in all kinds of subject matters. And at the point where she already had this interest developed, she did not only have positive feelings, but other indicators of the development of interest, such as taking pictures, the frequency, the depth of knowing, having knowledge about this, and that she was doing voluntary and independent engagements. And I am emphasizing this because this is the core of what we have argued people should use in evaluating, measuring interest. We have written about this, and I'm not going to go into this, but people who have an interest have basically a frequent engagement, deepened engagement, voluntary and independent engagement. So you don't have to tell somebody to read the text. They do it because they want to. I don't think that I have much time to tell you about all the supporting studies that had supported two things: the four-phase model of interest development and the power of interest for learning and engagement. I just want to mention that in 2022, we wrote an article for Motivation Science. If any one of you here is developing an individual interest, what I'm saying, then all these references are available to support the model. I just want to mention a few. One is Janssen. It's a German study in which interest predicted high school students' achievement across 5 different subjects: biology, chemistry, German, math, and physics. And this was a significant European finding that was very powerful to show how important indeed interest is in learning and achievement. And we had a great variety of studies that I don't know if I have time, but I just want to mention to you. There was a big fight between actually us and an American group from Michigan that was related to R. Anderson's group, because they suggested that if you are interested, then you are going to spend more time on reading something. And they couldn't find that, because if something is important, if you look for importance, the more time you spend, the better you are able to remember the information. And I have argued, we have argued, that actually interest is automatic attention. It's not an attention that you necessarily have to self-regulate, but it's automatic. And there was a big debate, and I am happy to report to you that in 2002, McDaniel, the American group, actually supported all our arguments. And ever since then, people kind of acknowledge that interest and attention go together. And it's not necessarily a conscious production of your brain, but if you are interested, you just pay attention to what's going on. The model was actually supported in a great variety of studies across a great type of groups, and it became quite valid and reliable studies supported it. One study that we looked at was what is triggering interest, and this was it was based on observations from a 5-week middle school age black youth activity in an inquiry-based workshop. And we found a variety of triggers for interest in this group. But as I mentioned to you before, whatever had personal relevance, self-related information processing were the most common triggers that worked for the group. Others worked like autonomy, they liked to do their own thing, novelty when they were new and challenging. Computers and technology triggered this interest in this group. Hands-on activities where they were given a chance. These are all things that teachers should pay attention to as a ways to trigger interest and support knowledge development. Instructional conversations, and of course personal relevance that I will return to. Use of life science examples is another study that we did, and I don't really have time to detail it for you, but I just want to mention to you there was two time terms. And in the first one, they used very difficult physics studies, students who wanted to become doctors, basically, or biophysicists. And the people, when they got the traditional text, when you looked at how much interest influenced the performance on a test, the pattern was expected. The ones who had lower levels of interest ratings did poorer than the ones who had the higher ratings. However, they have now did what they referred to as instructions, including examples. And they included illustrations, demonstrations, lab work, homework, etc. And this is what they found. Just look at to the left side first. What they found that the kids who have low interest initially, after the second term with this new text, performed the same way as the ones who started out with high interest. So the text actually changed not just the pattern of interest, but it also changed how they learned. On the right side, these are not connected, and it shouldn't be the graph that way, but I got this from Anne and didn't have time to change it. The people separately were evaluated to whom the new kinds of text, the examples, were the most interesting, rated, versus those who weren't. And again, they found in this study that those who rated the interest highest had done significantly better on their exams than the ones who didn't have the same increase in interest. Now, I'm going to skip this because I don't have time. So, how could Einstein be erroneous? How could he have made a mistake? This is what he said about himself. I have no special talent. I am only passionately curious. So I think that this is an error. He was not just passionately curious, but he was also passionately interested. I have given this part of the talk at a neuroscientific conference in Philadelphia, and everybody kind of fell off the chair when they saw that I want to say that he committed an error. But they eventually understood it. Okay, so in colloquial everyday language, you can say that I'm interested who's going to become the next president of the United States. I am interested or I'm curious. You can use either words and you will get it. And from this came the idea that they are synonymous. And I am passionately want to tell you that they are not, and I will explain to you why. They are not interchangeable terms. In neuroscience, they always focused on curiosity, not mentioning interest, either because the neuroscientists thought that it was they were synonymous terms, or else because they didn't even think about interest, that it's important. And only in recent years have other scientists, as well as my group and my associates, started to talk about the difference between these two conceptualizations. The reason that they are considered synonymous has some justification because they are commonly shared characteristics of curiosity and interest. They both have physiological roots. They are universally motivating, involve information search that is rewarding in the brain, and once triggered, do not need any more extrinsic rewards. So these are a lot of characteristics. So why am I saying that they are different? Okay, so they have different triggers. I already told you this before, that the Berlinian collative variables are associated with triggering curiosity, but especially uncertainty. All the studies that looked at curiosity and behavior in the classroom emphasize that there is an uncertainty created, and that uncertainty is that triggers curiosity. Interest is triggered, as I mentioned to you, by a lot of other things, and technology, self-related interventions, hands-on activities, etc. The duration is very different. Durations of curiosity is usually short-lived, and the duration of interest is unlimited. And this is also related to the goals, because the goals of duration, as it was actually best described by Lowenstein, that has become the definition that almost everybody uses in psychology research, was that curiosity is an information search to close a knowledge gap. And once that knowledge gap is closed, you are done. And in the book we wrote, and many places we gave examples, experimental examples of how this is true. But if you read a mystery novel, then you might know that occasionally your goal is to just close the knowledge gap. You go to the back of the book to find out who is the murderer, and you're done. Maybe you don't even finish your book. But interest, on the other hand, is a general information search. You have interest in content. You want to just be with that and know more about it. Knowledge. You want more knowledge in general when you are interested. The curiosity knowledge is an inverted U form. When you have a lot of knowledge, you are not particularly any more curious. And when you have no knowledge, you are not particularly curious because you can build in information into your schema. You don't care. So it has to be a moderate in order to be related to curiosity. Finally, affect. It was actually Berline in the 60s who first suggested that there is a negative feeling when you are very curious, and that once you find the answer, you feel a lot better. Now, this was like, 60 years ago that he suggested that, and it had to wait until we have functional MRIs and JEPMA's 2009 research that actually showed that when you are curious, some of the neural connections that lead to aversion are activated, and once you find the answer, the reward circuitry will be activated. So indeed, there is a sense of aversion when you are starting to be curious, if you're very curious, and different people have different tolerance. For example, my husband loves the kind of films that there is a lot of curiosity, and he doesn't care, and I have to leave the room because I can't tolerate that kind of curiosity. So now the effect of interest is primarily positive. You feel good about when you are actually doing something that you have interest in. This I want to just for a minute pause on this, because it is an educationally important question. Why is it important to distinguish between curiosity and interest? Because the studies that they wanted to increase curiosity basically focused on being tolerant with uncertainty. There are many studies in the literature that they were training kids not to worry about if they didn't know an answer, and be curious and not feel bad about this. But that curiosity, even if they tolerate it, doesn't lead to connections to content that will help the learning in the long run. It's quite likely to have a short-term effect. And interest directs ongoing search that leads to content links and questions and further engagements, which is really the purpose of the teacher or the professor. That you don't just want to have fleeting curiosity created, you want to have that kind of connection to content that also self-generates. Okay, so I'm running out of time. Okay, so the neuroscientific findings that I mentioned to you can be related to both interest and curiosity. But quickly, before I go to this issue, I just want to mention in fleeting the relationship between interest and other motivational variables, such as goals, self-efficacy, and self-regulation. And in order to finish on time, I'm just going to tell you that generally there is a reciprocal relationship between goals and interest obviously changes your goals, and you have goals and you engage without interest. Through this kind of engagement, you can also develop interest. And there's quite a lot of literature, mostly Judy Harakia, which is the main name here. I have no time to tell you this, but I just want you to understand that goals and interest are related and reciprocally related. And most likely, I would say that you change your goals as your interest develops. The next item here is self-efficacy. Lots of studies have showed the links between self-efficacy and interest. Mathematics, writing, throwing darts, etc. Zimmerman, all kinds of references are available to show that self-efficacious people are usually interested, and if you have a well-developed interest, you feel self-efficacious. There were a lot of arguments what comes first, and actually we have now come to the conclusion that most of the literature shows that if you are interested, as you develop an activity, you have many experiences and you become self-efficacious, so that interest precedes self-efficacy, although it can also be that you do skill and you are self-efficacious and originally you don't have interest, and then interest will slowly develop. But I want to say that it's not as common as the other way around. Finally, self-regulation. In the four-phase model that I showed you, as interest develops, self-regulation is one of the most important changes. As interest develops, you become much more self-regulated. You do the activity. You don't need to be bothered, reminded you want to do it. So self-regulation and interest are also reciprocally connected. And interestingly, Carol Sanson in 1992 already showed that you can also self-regulate your motivation and interest. She gave boring tasks to children and adults and adolescents, and found that they had ways to make those tasks which were boring more interesting. So they self-regulated to become more interested. And originally we thought that this was only in case of adolescents and adults. But Susan Nolan had a group of studies in which she showed that younger children already, when given a boring task, can find ways to self-regulate their motivation and become more interested. Quickly, conscientiousness. Is there any relation to interest of conscientiousness? So Trautwein, who is a German researcher, and his group, they have shown that there is a compensatory effect of being conscientious and being interested. And I thought I mentioned it to you because it's kind of interesting. So if you are conscientious, you are going to do your job, whether or not you have interest, because you are the kind of person who will do what you have to do. And I want to say there might be a gender difference in this, that females are more likely than males to do things without interest. There is research findings in the literature that kind of indicates this. So if you are not conscientious, then it's really important to have interest to do the tasks. because you are not going to, you are less likely to do it without interest. And these are not just, what I'm telling you is not just ideas, these are empirically proven based on many studies. Are you ready for the brain? I once gave a talk in the US, and the person, actually it was Chris Holloman, who said to me, you know, Suzanne, I don't know if you can talk to my group in the brain, because anytime I say the brain, everybody falls asleep. So I'm not going to go into depth, but I'm just going to mention to you that as early as in 1905 and 1910, there was a long history of suggesting that interest has a physiological, is related to physiological processes. But we didn't have the means of actually examining this in any scientific way for many, many years. And only now, oh, and another thing is that I wanted to mention, because Jaak Panksepp is one of my most admired colleagues who unfortunately is not alive. He wrote the seminal book of effective neuroscience, and in that book, he was talking about curiosity and interest, making a distinction, the only neuroscientist that I know who made this. And he was also lamenting or complaining how little physiological and psychological processes are related. And in order for psychology to be a significant scientific endeavor, this has to be changed. And very modestly, I tried to listen to him, I knew him, and try to make the connection between the psychological situation of interest and the physiological one. There were all kinds of neuroscientific advances, like the functional MRI and eye movements and the other kind of measures that have become fashionable and helped making some understanding of what happens when the brain is interested. The two areas are related to the activation of the reward circuitry, which you probably know. I don't know how much you would know about this, but just quickly, is a hardwired, evolutionary molded, because even monkeys and other lower level animals have this information processing mechanism, and it's fueled by the neurotransmitter dopamine that you probably know in relation to Parkinson. Many beneficial outcomes have been demonstrated for the reward circuitry activation. And we know that once that reward circuit is activated, attention, reaction time, attention increases, reaction time reduces, memory increases, performance increases. Original focus of the activation of the reward circuitry was related to extrinsic reward. It started with research on monkeys, you can find that, and then they have shown that the reward circuitry is also activated by extrinsic rewards. Nobody at that point was talking to the possibility that it's not extrinsic rewards only that triggered the reward circuitry. More recently, and this is the last 10 years, probably Jackie's research was the first one that Jackie Gottlieb in the University in New York started to show and question this. But she led a research program, and others as well, that showed that intrinsic rewards also similarly trigger the reward circuitry. And more importantly for my talk, intrinsic rewards include searching for information. So when individuals search for information, the reward circuitry is activated just like when they have extrinsic rewards. And this connection explains the power of interest, why it is so important for learning and attention and comprehension and etc. So it is interesting to note that there was all kinds of problems, and I'll come back to this in a minute, between a lot of psychologists and their reactions to activating the reward circuitry when it was only exclusively related to extrinsic rewards. Now that it's also related to intrinsic rewards, it's a problem for some people to explain that connection. So not only information research, information search, but even the anticipation of this kind of search has been shown to activate the reward circuitry. So there is a powerful link between searching for information and reward circuitry. And interest, and actually curiosity as well, make this search happening, and that kind of link to the reward circuitry explains the power of these two states. The second thing is the self. Now, I don't know how much you know about self-related information processing, and it's a very, very powerful conceptualization. When I ran across a meta-analysis of 129 studies that was published in 1997, I could not believe that they have found that self-reference was the most important aspect of what they memorized, what individuals memorized. So more than like 20 years ago, psychologists already knew that the self and self-related information, self-reference, is very powerful in determining what you will remember. It's a fundamental and intrinsic function of the brain, and any information that you can link to yourself, you have a bias in your memory. So the so-called cocktail party effect you might have heard before, you are in a full room of people and there's a lot of chats going around and somebody in the distance mentions your name. You don't hear anything else about that conversation, but you have a bias to hear your name mentioned. So that is a form of self-related information processing, and it's anything that is personally relevant benefits your memory and encoding. Self-related information processing has been demonstrated by tons of studies. It shows that memory, emotion, perception, decision-making are all benefiting if you can make a self-related information processing. Now, I just want to mention utility value intervention and personalization, maybe some things that you are familiar with. It was again Harakiewicz and Hullemann's group that did this kind of work, and Barnecki, that if you give text to children and you make them write a connection between that text and yourself, there are all kinds of benefits of that link. They learn better, they are more interested, especially underprivileged children who are not interested at all. But if you want to get to the depths of this, or the real explanation, it's all because you make self-related information processing for the children or individuals who are linking the course material with themselves. And it has very powerful outcomes. Again, something for pedagogical importance. We have argued that neuroscientists should actually try to disambiguate the relation between curiosity and interest debate, but I don't think they are listening to me. So, for example, eye movements have a history of a long time before all the new methods that showed that your eyes react differently for information that is ambiguous, or whether you are curious or not, and this would be a really nice way to try to distinguish between interest and curiosity, but need some neuroscientifically interested students to do this study. So now I have kind of finished talking about interest, and I just want to spend a few minutes and then I stop in extrinsic rewards. You probably heard a lot of negative things about how extrinsic rewards undermine interest, intrinsic motivation, and you probably heard about the undermining effect, which is very harmful, I think, for you to have understood it that way. Cooperation and competition is another distinction that has been made in the literature, linked to rewards. And Márta Fülöp, who is going to be my discussant, talked about it. And she referred to this dichotomy as the beauty and the beast phenomena, that extrinsic rewards are bad and intrinsic rewards are good. Intrinsic motivation is good, extrinsic is bad. Performance goals are bad, mastery goals are good. Cooperation is good, competition is bad. This is the dichotomy that has to stop, because in fact both of these dichotomous concepts work in our best interests. And the idea that rewards are good and can be used has had a big opposition in the psychological world. And one of the studies that the last study I'm going to mention to you is 2023, in which they have asked the research perspective, otherwise psychological researchers, how would you motivate students in the classroom? And they had, let's say, I think 7 or 8 ways that they listed that came out in an analysis. And then they asked classroom teachers as well of what are those that you use in your classrooms. And interestingly, they mapped perfectly on the 7, except that they had an extra. And the extra one was that most teachers used, and it's what called rewards. So basically, rewards are used by the teachers in the classroom, by the parents in their homes, all over the place. And it's important that that basically this whole literature that makes it into evil needs to stop, because rewards are part of human functioning. I am not even going to tell you what the closing is, but basically I just want to say that educators should be aware that they are uniquely positioned to encourage interest development, as well as the many ways that I mentioned here today that such development can be supported. I think I leave it. I'm running out of time. I have some future questions. I don't think they are important, okay? So thank you, and that's it.
Thank you for this insightful and inspiring presentation. We have invited 2 Hungarian researchers to further elaborate this topic and comment your lecture. But first, I invite Professor Andrea Kárpáti, who, yes, you are here. Okay, great. The co-chair of the research program on public education development of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, to chair the second part of this evening. Andrea, please.
Yes, we have 2 co-referents that I'm going to call to the floor, but before doing that, let me thank you very much, most cordially, for this inspiring and motivating lecture that certainly triggered our interests, and I can hear the circuitries buzzing in the audience. So after having heard the 2 co-reference, so to say, we are going to have questions, I'm sure about that. So first of all, let me call Professor Márta Fülöp, distinguished.
Very happy to continue, but don't we have a 10 minutes break now, or usually what?
Well, I'm fine, whatever. I talk probably more, yes. Sure.
If we may continue? Yes.
I just wanted to clarify.
Well, with a lot of titles, Márta is not just a distinguished professor, but also editor-in-chief of our psychology journal of the Hungarian Academy of Science. So let's hear her remarks.
Yes. Thank you very much for the invitation to give really some small remarks and absolutely not exhaustive remarks to this very rich and very thought-provoking talk. And secondly, I have to say that there was a discussion among us on in what language to prepare the presentation. And according to my memory, we decided that we prepare it in Hungarian. Of course, we have many in the audience who don't understand Hungarian. So my PowerPoint is in Hungarian, but of course, when I realized that there are so many people in the audience who don't understand Hungarian, I am going to speak in English. So you can read the slides in Hungarian, and those who are unable to read the slides, they can listen to me, and I will explain what you can see in the slides. And let's start. So I would like to speak about the interpersonal context of interest, because when Professor Hidi highlighted her model of interest development, and she arrived to the fourth phase, that was really something that is in the middle of this slide or figure of mine. There is the person who is interested, there is the topic or the content that the person is interested in, and there is this process of interest. Yes, usually you don't see it like that. So there is this process of interest, what is going on while the person is dealing with this topic of interest. Okay, this is very solitary, isn't it? And this is the fourth phase. When Csikszentmihalyi, for instance, speaks about flow, then you forget about the word, forget about the whole social environment. You are just you and the topic or what you are doing. You are basically almost one with it. So a deep interest, when you are really, really interested in something, is this kind of, to me, sounds like a little bit solitary. You are there. But of course, when we think about this person who is sitting there with a topic of interest, this person is in a complete, very complex social environment. And this person has been in that complex social environment while that person arrived to this fourth phase of the interest model, and is going to be in this kind of complex social environment in the future as well. And of course, I could have put concentric circles about the different kinds of social influences that a person gains or gets or experiences while being interested, but I decided that I do this kind of patchwork. You see that more like they are there. So, of course, there are macro influences like the society and culture, of course, which influences the interest, what we are interested in. There is the media, which influences what we are interested in. There is the economic background of that society or which the person lives in, because I can be very much interested in how Porsche cars are functioning if there are no Porsche cars around me at all, because in my country basically there are no cars. Okay, so in a way, of course, now with media and internet, many things can be followed, but you understand what my point is. So obviously, the economy and the resources that surround us, they also limit or open up the possibility what we are interested in and how we can pursue our interest. And I put in green science, because of course, we are sitting in the building of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. We are scientists or future scientists who are PhD students. So we know that scientists are interested in the topics that they do research about. Many times really deeply interested in the topics they are doing research about. But without the resources, the economy background, you see, without competition for those resources, and we are going towards, of course, that topic, there is a limit how you can deepen your interest in many cases. So, of course, this is the person with the content, interested content, and there are, of course, parents, there are, of course, teachers, There are, of course, peers. There are other students in the class if you go to school. There are colleagues in your workplace. There are colleagues in the university, in the research institute. There are colleagues internationally and globally who do research, for instance, on exactly the same topic you do, and so on and so on. So you are not alone with your interest, you see. You are all the time in a really complex social environment. And of course, you have your competitors. You have those who you compare yourself with. Where I am I better, am I worse, am I ahead, am I back? Do I know as much as that person, or do I know less than that person? And these competitors can be partners, can be friends, can be opponents, can be enemies. And all these also can influence how you relate to your interest. Okay, so the first topic is interest and contests and competitions. And we have to make a difference between two kinds of competitions, spontaneous, which is based on social comparison, that nobody tells us that you should compare yourself to your colleague. You just do it because you want to know where you are, and you are happy if you are a little bit ahead. You may be sad if you are a little bit behind. And according to Festinger, the upward process that starts when you are a little bit worse is competition, that you want to improve yourself and want to be better. This is totally spontaneous, but there are, of course, institutionalized contests and institutionalized competitions when there are clearly announced winners and losers. In the previous case, in the spontaneous case, you announce yourself winner or loser. Nobody does that for you. But in the institutional one, there are standards that decide who is a winner or a loser. And now, the ruling paradigm is, and Zsuzsi referred to that in her talk at the end of her talk, was that competition destroys interest. Okay, so that was the ruling paradigm. Because interest is very much connected to intrinsic motivation, and very much connected to mastery motivation, what is the research field of Józsa, Krisztián. And interest is going together with increased effort that is put into a deeper cognitive processing, okay? So this is how interest is conceptualized. But competition, as opposed to this, is conceptualized as an extrinsic motivation. Because in case we compete, either I say I am better and I get some kind of recognition from myself or from others, and it's a kind of extrinsic social reward, or you are clearly a winner, or you may get a prize, you may get a scholarship, you may get your research grant, you may get your entrance to the university. There are tangible rewards when you win in a competition or you are better in a competition. So it's extrinsic, okay? And so if we put together interest, which is considered to be intrinsic, and competition, which is considered to be extrinsic, then many studies based on the ideas of DC and Ryan and the self-determination theory, they said that that those children, those people who are interested in something, when they are rewarded extrinsically, they lose their interest. So the extrinsic reward, in fact, reduces their interest. In this respect, competition also reduces their interest. Okay, is this true? Is this true? And I want to show you a study which was done in Hong Kong and which addressed this topic. That is that true that trade competitiveness, performance motivation, which is also considered to be related to competition, if that really reduces deep learning, and deep learning also is connected to interest. And there is the Western model, and that says that there is trait mastery, there are mastery goals, and there is deep learning, which increases interest and is related to increased interest, okay? And then there is trait competitiveness, there is performance goal, and there is surface learning. It's just surface learning. And interest goes down. You can see 2 minus there, okay? So that reduces interest. This is the Western model. Now, what is the Chinese model? That there is the trait mastery, and it leads to mastery goals. And it leads to deep learning and increases interest. Okay. But then there is trait competitiveness, which leads to performance goals, and it also leads to deep learning. There is no connection here, if you look here, no connection to surface learning. Either you are mastery motivated or you are performance motivated. Both leads to deep learning and increased interest, okay? So that's something related to this. Okay, it is also said that a competitive school environment that reduces interest. You are just in fact, you are interested in getting good grades, but you are not interested in the topic. It doesn't increase the student interest towards the content. Okay, this is also a Hungarian and Chinese comparison, high school students, and I just, we had some statements that imagine that you are sitting in a class where there is a lot of competition. And then there were statements, how do you agree with these statements? And then imagine you are in a class where there is no competition, or very, very, very little competition, and again the statements. And what we found in both countries, that in the competitive school environment, in both cases, students in both countries, students become more curious. We listen to the difference between curiosity and interest. But then there is another one which says we can concentrate better. And concentration is already going deeper into what you are listening to or what you are dealing with, okay? Because curiosity, I would say, usually it's extensive. I am curious, but interest is intensive. It's going deep, okay? So when you say, I am not only curious, not only increases my curiosity, but it increases my concentration, then already you are going towards the deep, okay? And in both countries, this was the case. The only thing where the non-competitive climate was higher was being boring, okay? And meaning that in a non-competitive classroom, interest is less evoked, or curiosity and concentration is less evoked. Okay, effects of contests. Again, following the line that competition destroys interest, okay? So now we are speaking about institutionalized competitions, and we did a study with highly talented, highly gifted students who were participating in contests and were either outstanding, meaning first 3 in international and highly prestigious Hungarian competitions, or among the best 20, they were the not outstanding, okay? The sample we got from Motivational, the Hungarian Talent Society, and we asked the students what kind of effect you think participating in contests had on you. And we didn't have a particular interest because that's not my research topic, but there was such a statement among the many that participating in contests increased my interest towards the particular field, okay? So that means, and that was it was a 5-point scale. It had 4.1 as an average, meaning that very highly the participants agreed that the contest didn't destroy their interest, but in fact, it increased their interest towards that particular field. Okay, and now, of course, we have to speak about high achievement and peak achievers and highly gifted people, because in that case, nobody questions that they are interested in what they are high performance about. And Pirto, a Finnish researcher on gifted people, she wrote a very interesting book about competitions, rivalries among highly gifted people, scientists and artists. And she got to a very interesting conclusion that how much the rivalry is sometimes not even constructive rivalry, but in fact really negative relationship among the rivals increased this kind of wish that I want to show and made these people go deeper in that scientific topic. Want to expand their knowledge about that scientific topic, kept their interest focused in spite of all adversaries in order to show the rival that they are better. So this is what she shows, and of course this is the case in case of scientists as well. So basically future direction in terms of research, what kind of competition, among whom, among what kind of social, cultural circumstances increases interest and leads to deep learning, and what kind of competition which really leads, that really leads to more superficial learning and really destroys interest and really encourage people to be satisfied with cheap solutions. Because of course this can be the case as well. Competition not always leads to deeper interest, not always leads to really constructive results, but sometimes doesn't. But what are the conditions that define between these at least two ways to do? So thank you very much. This was my comment.
To witness how different aspects of psychology and education are all channeled into the motivation research group. I've never thought about competition in relation to interest. However, that's what we do at school. We make students compete to keep them alive, to keep them interested, to keep them on focus. So, after having heard a professor of psychology, let us now hear a professor of education. And let's see how Krisztián Józsa from the University of Szeged has his take on the subject.
Dear colleagues, as Professor Márta Fülöp mentioned, we originally decided to have this discussion in Hungarian. So our plan was to have some kind of a bilingual discussion at the end of Suzanne Hidi's talk, but my slides are in English. So, so my original plan was to have English slides in English and talk in Hungarian, but now I'm going to talk in English. So Márta was focused on the competition and the relationship between competition and interest. My goal is to give you some kind of an overview of the Hungarian research on motivation and its relation to interest. Unfortunately, we do not have an empirical study in Hungarian on the basis of interest theory. So we know this three phases model, and I wrote 2 chapters on it in Hungarian, one with Beata Szencit, and we focused on how can we measure it. And also when I published the book on mastery motivation, which is elsajátítási motiváció in Hungarian, I also have a short chapter on this interest model. And we always plan to have some kind of empirical study on interest, but that will be in the future. So, Professor Hidi mentioned that there are many related concepts of interest, but first of all, I would like to give you a short story when we met each other. So I have known Professor Suzanne Hidi, Gyöngyvér, since 1999. And we first met in Sweden, Gothenburg. And there was an early conference there. That was the proceedings book of that conference in Sweden. And that was my very first talk in English at an international conference. And you know, I learned Russian and German in primary school and middle school. So I was really nervous about to speak in English in an international conference. So I had the talk, and that focused on self-concept. That first talk the title was Mathematics Self-Concept, Physics Self-Concept, and Academic Achievement. And I was over my talk, and I was a PhD student, and okay, I'm done. And then Gyöngyvér raised her hand and asked a question in Hungarian. and she said, jó előadás volt ez, de azért erre még kellene figyelni. Was something like that. And she was also talking about that there is a close relation between interest and self-concept, but those are two different concepts. So there are, and the early conference 2 years ago was also in Gothenburg, Sweden. So there was already 2 conferences in Gothenburg, early conference. So there are, in the field of motivation, we use many different terms. And Gyöngyvér mentioned many of them. And she didn't go into the details, but she was talking about that there are relations between self-efficacy, self-concept, attention, persistent, effort, emotions. And my main research interest is mastery motivation, which is, I mentioned, elsajátítási motiváció in Hungarian. And mastery motivation means to focus and persist at a moderately challenging task, or at least a moderately challenging task, which is also a different concept, not interest, but we can assume that there is a relation between interest and mastery motivation. At the very beginning today, we remembered Professor Benőre Csapó, and his main research area was, I would say, cognitive development and cognitive skills and learning and instruction, but he was not really a researcher in the field of motivation. But he has some publications in the field of motivation. For example, this study was published in Hungarian, a tantárgyakkal kapcsolatos attitűdök összefüggése. It was published in Magyar Pedagógia in 2000, and the translation of the title is Students' Attitudes Towards School Subjects, which is, it was a simple questionnaire or a simple question. What he asked the students, how much do you like learning the following subjects? Which is liking the subjects, not an interest, but really close connection. It has a close connection to interest. And interestingly, I checked in the MTMT, which is some kind of library for the Hungarian researchers. And this is Csapó Benőre's most cited paper published in Hungarian. I would say most popular article in Hungarian, and it has 142 citations, which is really a high number if you publish an article in Hungarian. And I would like to cite a figure from this article. So this is the attitudes towards the different subjects. And maybe this is a small figure, but you can see that in this figure we can see the age changes from grade 5 up to grade 11. And we can see the decreasing tendency of the different subjects. The red line down here is physics. The students really do not like physics. That's the decreasing. Another decreasing is the blue line. And the blue line, this one, is chemistry. And the green line, I'm not sure we can see the colors on the figure. The green one is mathematics. So those are the scientific, or the subjects close to science. So we can see the decreasing, and it is really true in all cases, in all subjects. So why is it, and how can, for example, interest can help, or interest theory can help with us in this situation? And I would like to show you another very similar study which focused on mastery motivation, subject-specific dimensions of mastery motivation. So we really, in the studies in education, try to focus on school context and try to focus on school subjects. So if we see the subject-specific dimensions of mastery motivation, so being focused and being persistent in different subjects, we can see a very similar trend. So this is also a cross-sectional study from grade 2 up to grade 10. And this is math, this is reading, going down. And if we see the science, it's a much bigger decrease. And if we see music, that's the yellow one, it's also a decrease, and a decrease in art. But we do not see a big decrease in English as a second language. So that's something different here. Maybe the students can feel the practical value of English, or I don't know why, but maybe that could be the reason. And there is another language, another second language, German. We can see some decrease here, but not as much as in music or science or art. And if we would like to analyze these age changes, we can ask different raters. So students means here self-rating. Students can rate their motivation, but also the parents can rate their kids, their children's motivation, and teachers can rate the students' motivation. And all of the three raters, the student self-ratings and the teachers and the parents, show the similar, very similar trend, the decreasing trend. So we also can ask why and what we can do with it. And maybe the interest theory can help with us in this situation. So the question, do all students lose motivation? Because if all students lose motivation, maybe that can be some kind of normal change, I would say. But if we analyze the changes individually, we should have a longitudinal study. And in a longitudinal study, we can see the individual changes. So in this figure, we can see these individual changes. This was a longitudinal study from grade 4 up to grade 8. So that was a 4 years long longitudinal study. And we analyzed the individual changes in motivation, in mastery motivation. And what we found here that there was 15% of the students whose motivation increased. So not decreased, it increased. There was 15% whose motivation was stable, did not change, and 70% decreased. So we can say that both changes is possible. The motivation can increase, the motivation can be stable, and the motivation can decrease. So there is a very interesting question why we can see these differences. So what are differences in that classrooms? What are differences between the teachers who are teaching in that classrooms? So I think the main point here is that the increase is also possible in school. So that means we should have some kind of an improvement programs, and we also should have some kind of classroom studies when we can observe the teachers' work there and observe the students' work there and learn how they do it and why that the students' motivation increased. So I don't have time to go into the details, but we have found that there were big differences between the classes, and there were big differences between the teachers in this longitudinal study between grade 4 and grade 8. And we also had a cross-cultural study where we compared the age changes of 3 countries: Hungary, that's the red line, US, America is the green one, and then China, which is the blue line. And the tendency is same. So there is a decreasing of mastery motivation in all of the countries. But if we compare the 3 countries, we can say the Hungarian students are the less motivated. And the students in the US have somewhat higher or stronger motivation, and the students in China has the highest, comparing these 3 countries. So same tendencies, but there are differences between the countries, or there are maybe cultural differences. We also can ask why, what is the reason, and what we can learn, for example, from China, or is it the methods what they use in China, is it possible to use in Hungary or not? And I compared these results with the PISA results. So now, now in this slide we can see the motivation differences. Hungary down here, US is somewhat more motivated, and China is somewhat more motivated. And the PISA studies are focusing on age 15, so it's close to grade 8 in the Hungarian system. So if we see the PISA results, and if we compare these 3 countries based on the PISA 2018, and now the next PISA results will come out in this December. So we are really curious about those new results. But if we compare these 3 countries, China is the red, US is the blue, and Hungary is the yellow, we can see exactly the same trend in the 3 main fields: reading, mathematics, and science. So the best is China in reading and also in math and science. And there is not a big difference, but there is a difference between US and Hungary. And the US is better than Hungary in reading and science. And if we analyze or see the combined variable of these 3 areas, so I combined math, reading, and science and created one variable, we can say that China has the highest achievement, and there is a difference between US and Hungary, but not a big difference. And it is very similar what we have found in case of mastery motivation, if you remember that plot. In this PISA study, there was 77 countries altogether. And the order of the studies, the very first one was China, among the 77 studies in this combined variable. The USA was the 25th, and Hungary was the 33rd. So the US and Hungary is somewhere in the middle, but far away from China. So if we compare the PISA results with our mastery motivation study, we can see very similar differences between them. So maybe we can say that motivation can influence or predict achievement, and also we can say that achievement can modify the motivation. So there is, I think, a vice versa relation between them. And I would like to mention you shortly another study done in Hungary, where we analyzed the predictive power of motivation on later school achievement. This was an 8-year-long longitudinal study. So the pre-test was in preschool, that means age 4, and the post-test was in grade 6, that was around age 12. So it was 8 years between the two data collection points. And our post-test was the Hungarian National Assessment of Basic Competencies, országos kompetencia mérés, which is a nationally standardized test. And in this figure, I used the reading scores as a dependent variable. And in this regression model, I used 3 independent variables: mother's education as a family background, and mother's education explains 7% of the later reading achievement. Mastery motivation explains 11%. And our third model, third independent variable in this model was IQ, and it explains 13%. So that means motivation has nearly as big or as much explained power as IQ. IQ 13 and motivation is 11, and it's altogether 31 explained variance. And I would like to show you another dependent variable, which was the school grades, the GPA, and the same regression models, the same 3 independent variables. Mother's education, in case of GPA, has much higher explained variance. So the previous model was the reading competence, which was a standardized test, and this is the grading from the teachers. So I think it's really important that in teachers' ratings, the parents' education or the mother's education has much higher explained variance than in an outside standardized test. And the same mastery motivation has 13% of explained variance, and IQ just 11. And it's in the total is 44. So what I mentioned is that motivation is really important in this case, and in this long period, 8 years long, it has a significant explained variance. Our previous invited speaker here in the Hungarian Academy of Science, this was Erik Hanusek, and his presentation was in this February. He's a professor in Stanford University, and he was talking about the education in the changing world. I know many of you presented on his talk, and he mainly focused on how can we improve the school's effectiveness. And I borrowed this slide from his presentation, and he mentions 3 key factors or 3 solutions. How can we improve schools' effectiveness? The very first one is improve teachers' effectiveness. And the second one, he said, improve teachers' effectiveness. And the third one, improve teachers' effectiveness. That was very close to his end of his speech. So how can we improve school effectiveness? And how can we improve teachers' effectiveness? And I think based on this series, one important point is to improve teachers' motivation. And the other important point is to improve students' motivation. And if we can improve teachers' motivations and students' motivation, maybe we can improve teachers' effectiveness in schools. And we had some experimental studies where we try to improve the motivations in school, in the classroom. And in those studies, we really mainly focused on the teaching methods, and we changed the methods of the teachers, or we changed the content, what they taught in the classroom. And in those studies, we have found that if we change the classroom, if we change the content, we can really improve motivation in the classroom. And if we would like to focus on the interest theory Gyöngyvér was talking about, I think that is really a crucial and very important point here, that this interest theory can be a basis for creating school programs for improving motivation. So I think that could be a goal for us. I think maybe the first one I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, to have empirical research in Hungary in the field of interest. And the second one, to have improvement programs for improving students' motivation in school based on the interest theory. So I think this is my take-home message from today. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, so before we ask any questions, I just want to talk to you for a couple of minutes, because I have some ideas about the questions you raised. So let me just stay here or sit down or something. So first of all, it occurred to me that you have showed about the decrease in motivation in general. And we have talked about this many years, but unfortunately, there are facts that cannot be denied, that as you go to school, and the kids are very enthusiastic when they come, they don't know how much work is involved. And one of the reasons in this reduction in motivation that you were started in your speech, Krisztián, may be related to the amount of work, that the workload, the effort that is required is not the same in grade 1 as is in grade 4. And this is not, the teacher's fault, not the parents' fault. This is just the fact of life. And one of the reasons why you see that decreasing motivation in all research, you find this. In America, in Hungary, in all subject matters, you find a decrease when you self-report data on how interested kids are, how they have mastery, whatever there is. The other thing I wanted to mention to you, that the hierarchical subjects, such as science, mathematics, language, is where the knowledge is being built in a hierarchical way. So if the students don't perform or don't learn or don't study, they get decreasing marks, and that decreasing mark also affects their motivation. While in English, you show you can read, let's say, Az ember tragédiája in 1 year and Hamlet in the next year, and how well you did one is not necessarily affecting the other. So this might be that you don't see the same kind of negative decrease over the years. So, and I do have a question. That you talk about mastery goals, but you don't talk about at all these performance goals. And I think that if you incorporated performance goals, it would explain a lot more of the variance. Okay?
Yes. The reason is the mastery motivation theory and the mastery goals theory are coming from two different I would say, researcher group. The mastery motivation, mainly based on Yarrow and Morgan and Karen Barrett studies, and originally they focused on younger kids. And the mastery goal and performance goal are coming from from the US, from different researchers. And intriguingly, there is really a weak connection between these two very similar theories, and I think it's really typical, not just in the field of motivation, but in many areas. There are similar concepts, but coming from different sources.
Okay, thank you. So I guess we should have, Andrea, a question answer, or everybody's ready to go home.
Absolutely. And I am so thrilled about this development that we are hearing you and reflecting on you. Because since my childhood, I was wondering, why isn't it evident that school has to be interesting? That teaching has to be not just motivating, it has to be somehow fun. And there are so many endeavors like amusement-based or experiment-based teaching and learning, and it doesn't take root. But probably with your ideas, it will fertilize the ground, and also the competition theory and the mastery learning that Krisztián mentioned. So please, dear audience, pose your questions. Do we have
over there?
Right? Do we have a microphone, or you will just?
Do you have to come up here, I think, to be heard? We were told, no?
Oh yes, we will have a microphone, a mobile mic.
I'm sorry, I'm going to get back to your lecture. Thank you very much, reminding of the little talk we had before.
We know you, but tell us your name.
Well, Dr. Bádos, we talked before that, BARDOS, and I'm not a specialist in psychology. My field is language pedagogy and applied linguistics. In your lecture, you said interest is static.
Is not static.
It's not static because it's developmental.
It's malleable.
You said. Yes, that's why it is changing. Well, somehow I feel, or at least I felt during my career, a controversy in this. I didn't deal with the structure of interest, let's say, but to my mind, at least this is how I feel, that the content of interest, the content areas of interest, do not really change by the passing time. I reckon perhaps...
No, that's correct.
Okay, then one question is answered. The other question is whether this developmental means that can these intensity in interest decrease by the passing time?
Yes.
Is this a law or is it just a biological fact?
Oh no,
Thank
definitely the whole idea is that it can increase and that it can be supported to increase. And that was one of the main points that I wanted for this audience because of the pedagogical implications, is that the teachers and the parents have a mode and a way in which they can contribute to that increase. It is certainly the case that your interest, the topic of your interest, may be a lifelong one, but it also may change, it may drop off. Like, you know, kids love to talk about dinosaurs, and after a while they change the topic of their interest to maybe collecting stamps. And that has its run, and then it changes. And you guys who are here, maybe you have an interest in psychology that has been there for a number of years. Okay? You.
There is a question over there, right? Or you? Yes. Where do we have the microphone?
I can yell.
Oh, you can yell. That's lovely.
Okay, so I was really intrigued about all your talks. It was very new to me. I'm a psychologist, Anna Veresztékely from ELTE at the psychology department. And because I'm the mother of teenagers and living through this decrease, and I'm fond of data, I was thinking, okay, so children maybe lose their interest, motivation, many things, but maybe they just specialize towards something they're really interested in. So what if, it's a question to both Krisztián, what if you cut your data to only the best ratings? I'm not interested what they don't like or don't, amuse, but only the best rating. And the question from an interest point of view, do you think that interest would have something to do with the emerging pattern if that were different from the very, discouraging decrease that we see?
Well, I'm not sure that I actually understand fully the question, but for example, the teenagers' interest in social media is definitely not reducing, but increasing. And there are age-related interests that keep on developing, but some are more healthy than others. So, I don't know what would happen if you looked at what the teenagers are more interested in, because they are unlikely to be related to subject matters, unfortunately, such as mathematics or like if you give them a choice. Now, you could look at the subject matter and say, who are those kids who are really interested, and then sort of restrict your further investigations to that group who is in that very small percentage who are really interested, let's say, at age 12 in physics. But in general, the problem is that in the classroom, the teacher needs to focus on trying to trigger those kinds of interests that are academically relevant.
I don't argue that. I'm just saying.
Now, maybe Krisztián, maybe you want to add something on here, please.
Thank you. So I was talking about the age changes in school context and in subjects, school subjects, and we know many of the reasons. Józsa also mentioned it, the gradings of the students, the content of the subject, the school books, and being an adolescent, so being a boy and a girl and interesting with the others. So there are many reasons we know, and what we focused on that is the school context and school subjects. And yes, many students has some kind of a specific interest, what you mentioned, for example, in the social media or some kind of hobbies or something like that. So just, we did not do a research on it, we just focused on the school subjects. But I agree with you.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much. I'm János Győri, and I have two short questions. Can we talk about interest in non-human world among animals, or they are only curious? Because the animals, many of them, they are very curious. The other one is that how can you connect your theory with the quality of achievement? So can we differentiate maybe interest and meaningful interest, because we have many amateurs who are very keen on doing and dealing with this and that, so they have real interest, but never ever they become expert of the field.
Okay, so your first question is whether animals can have interest or curiosity. Is that correct? Am I understanding it right? Well, curiosity kills the cat, so it's the kind of idea that we know that animals have curiosity. By my definition, I would have problems to say that they have interest without the kind of representations that humans have, okay? I would say that I would limit the reward circuitry kind of activation to, I would know that that can happen with curiosity, but I would not argue that I would put it to interest. Interest in academia is the one that is usually related to academic achievements. And you are absolutely correct that people can have non-academic interests and be great achievers in various skills, but the performance as such in academia is usually related to measurements of that type of interest that is related to academic subjects. Does that answer your question?
question, let me ask something. What I loved most in your theory was self-related interest, the involvement of the self. And you know who came into my mind? Alexander the Great, who embarked on a mission to conquer the world and unite East and West, but he had company, mentor, the name giver to the spiritual guide, leader, coach, whoever, that we are using today. Mentor, his teacher, went with him. And Alexander was competitive and not interested in art very much. But Mentor raised his interest in culture and developed a different second line of conquer, collecting art, having it all, conquering culture. So a self-interest, can you tell me how you measure that, or what are you doing in this line of research?
Well, self-related information processing has been shown as very recent, okay? Because there are self-reports and there are also reports on brain functioning that have shown what kind of activation occurs. And Suez and Humphrey are two names who have done a huge amount of work in this area. And what they have shown is that if you have self-related information, which is totally biasing your memory, your attention, your decision-making, they have shown various very cute tasks. Like if you show triangles and circles and little squares, and you associate one with the mother, the other with the person itself and the stranger, these are perceptual tasks. Then you ask how people remember this. Well, anything that was originally paired with the self, that is the geometric, which will be best recalled. Second would be what was associated with the mother. And the third would be the stranger. So in some way, as we process this information, how it's related to the self is becoming part automatically of what you actually have stored. And in the classroom, the implications are very important because in the last few years, they have, I don't know in Hungary, I'm not familiar, but I know in the United States, personalization, and I mentioned utility value interventions became very fashionable ways to try to increase interest and learning. And they have not made the real link to what they are doing in these interventions is self-related information processing, because all of these interventions were focused on making the association, the link between the person and whatever the topic was. And when they ask children to write about a particular course material and themselves, that is a way that the teacher uses the facilitation of the self-related information processing. So if I ask you what is your, read this text and somehow make it related to your mother's teaching or to yourself or anything around yourself, and you write about that, this is actually activating the self-related information processing, and you're going to do much better than if you just read the same amount of time you spend reading something. So these are all empirical studies, many of them, that show this, that regardless of the time that you give to people to read the text, the minute you encourage and force them actually to make some kind of link between the material and yourself through your mother. In some studies, they actually used learning from the parents. And that actually increases the attention paid, the interest expressed, and the learning that occurs.
Thank you very much.
Marty.
I just want to say that if self-related information is so important, and I believe so as a psychologist as well, then of course competition is very much self-related.
For sure.
Because you compare yourself, you evaluate yourself, you come up with a result, which can be beneficial to your self-esteem, can be detrimental to your self-esteem. Everything is about yourself, you see. And also when you decide that, okay, I don't want to be worse, then it's self-improvement. Again, speaking about myself, speaking about how I conceptualize myself in my social network or in the social hierarchy. So in that sense, when we say, you said, Andrea, that the teacher introduces competition and children become interested. Because it's related to their self. And the question is how to use this well. How to use this in a way that it really contributes to self-development and developing each other, as opposed to destroying ourselves and destroying our rivals around.
The reason that I cannot say anything about your talk is because I agree with everything that you said, and I don't have any questions. So, of course, I agree with you 100% on the evaluation of competition versus cooperation, and exactly I agree with any kind of competition includes the self. I mean, you competing, it's you. And I also want to emphasize that even though it has not been recognized by many psychologists, this kind of processing in the brain is automatic. The self is there, and even in the so-called state when you don't think that you are aware, even then yourself, that kind of state is active in your brain. These are all factual findings. In neuroscience, we published a paper in 2017 with a neuroscientist in which we have explained some of this stuff. But it's there. So the self, you can get rid of. You live with it, you get up with it, and you go to bed with it. And that's it.
Just one more thing, because Anna, I understood a little bit different what you said, because the data that motivation is decreasing or interest is decreasing is aggregated. I mean, it's group averages, okay? Even if it is one subject, let's say mathematics, okay, it goes down. But when we look at the individual, it can happen that I have 12 subjects, okay? I am interested in mathematics, and that interest stays, but all the others go down. And when I am put together with everybody else who is not interested in mathematics, then the average will be, this is what you meant, Anna?
Yes.
Exactly, yes. And I think from this point of view, it would so because when we grow, we tend to have specialized interests, and it is not social, it's not outside academia. I like mathematics and I don't like all the other subjects, you see. But if I am put together with all the others who are not interested, then the average will go down. The same with chemistry, the same with the Hungarian language, the same with history or whatever. So from this point of view, I think it's individually should be looked at, you see, that what happens, that is there a subject in each case, fortunately it should be the case, in each case that stays and others go down when we look at it.
Okay, so that's the average versus the individual. Yeah, but the fact is that when you look at all these graphs, once they get combined, there is a general reduction in all the good things you want, interest, learning, etc. Marta's point is correct, and maybe that's what I didn't understand about your question, that individually varying, and that the kind of graphs that Krisztián showed is an aggregation of many, and that doesn't, of course, mean that individuals can't have any different patterns.
And Krisztián, could you explain that chart when you showed 15% who increased their interest in some of the subjects, and some 5%, I think, who stayed the same, because you actually did not only show doom and doom going all down, but you also showed us hope, that there are some who retain interest. Do you have something to say about that chart?
Yeah, so in that study we had nearly 30 school classes. So that was, the sample was over 300. nearly 400 students. And we compared, not just, we analyzed the individual changes. So the chart that I showed was there was the motivation in grade 8 minus motivation in grade 4. So we see the differences in that chart. But if we analyze it by school classes, we can see huge differences between the school classes. So there were school classes where the decrease were just a minimal or no decrease, and there were classes where the decrease really big, really huge. And all of the classes were from different schools. So they had different school contacts, different teachers, different classmates. So
teachers matter.
Teachers matter, yes, correct.
Teachers matter.
And classmates matter. But
this is our hope.
We also analyzed the family background on it. And the family background doesn't have a significant effect on it. That was really, I think, important or new for us. So the students, children with good family background decreased in motivation, and the students with low family background decreased in motivation. And the same way, no differences. And also we compared the students who has good school grades, high GPA, and low GPA, and the situation is same. The motivation decreased with high school achievement and with low school achievement. So what we have found, the difference is based on the school classes, based on the teachers and classmates.
Okay, I think we're running out of time, so I just have one comment to make, and then we will, I think, break. One comment is that I have not mentioned to you the research on teachers' interest, and while Andrea was asking me, there is significant literature on it, and the one important finding is that teachers' interest in both the subject matter and in their students have significant relation to students' developing interest. So those teachers who are interested in the subject matter they teach, as well as in their students in general, produce the best positive results.
That's good. That's good. That's our job now, right? Teacher trainers. Our room is full of teacher trainers. Well, thank you so much for sharing your ideas with us, Zsuzsanna. And thank you, Márta and Krisztián, for your insightful comments from both. And now let me ask László Bozó, academician, our chairperson, to close the meeting.
Okay, so thank you very much for accepting the invitation by the Academy of Sciences.
Thank you.
Give you this
Thank you so much.
present. Thank you. And see you next time.
Thank you.